Good evening, everybody. I hope you're all well, and thanks for joining us for another episode of FOF'cast. Looking forward to today's pod, where I'm joined by my regular co-hosts, Scott Tanfield and Gerry Pimm. This is the first of the two we are going to do as we look back on the season and look forward to the future. Today we're going to talk about the Newcastle game, the importance of fans to our season, and talk a bit more about the way things tailed off both on and off the pitch after our relegation to the Championship was confirmed. Before we got into that, I think we'd all like to send our good wishes out to Kevin McDonald for his operation, which was scheduled for May the 25th. A proper leader for us both on and off the pitch, so get well soon. Scott, how are you doing?
I'm good, Owen. Nice to be back. It's been a while since we've done the last pod. It's nice to have you hosting again, as I say, and I think we discussed this many times. The last one we did was an absolute hit. Last time I looked, I think it was around about sort of touching 3,500 listens. So I don't know what's happened there, but hopefully this one is a good one. I'm relieved in some way, if I'm honest with you, that the season's over. Feel a little bit happier now. We kind of get to have a bit of a blank slate, but we all know what's going to happen. But hello, Gerry. Nice to have you back on. Yeah, looking forward to it, mate.
Good. And good to hear with those viewing stats. I'm sure Gerry and I will look out for our royalty checks in the mail. So great news. Gerry, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks, Owen. Nice to chat to you both. I'd like to thank my mum for listening to the podcast 3,000 times. But yeah, all good. I'm glad it's all over, frankly, this season.
Exactly. I can't say I disagree. And now that dust has settled, season's over. I think it's really time to talk the future. Try and inject some positivity after the shock of the season. So I'm going to start with the biggest and most important question: what's everyone drinking tonight? Scott?
Cup of tea. Time I got in from work, and as I said to you, literally trousers off, sitting in my pants, made a cup of tea straight on the pod. Can't get any more exciting than that.
We've just breached Apple's terms and conditions, so not 3,000 listens this week. Gerry, what about you?
A bottle of water. Rock and roll.
Oh, well, I'll complete the hardcore outlook with a Coke Zero, so fantastic. Anyway, now that we've had that summary of delightful drinks, let's move on to the real topic number one, the Newcastle game. I don't really want to dwell too much on it, as I'll confess, I didn't watch it, and I sort of followed it in the pub with all the guys I usually sit with when I go to the game. We all decided we were going to put about as much effort into attending as Fulham. But nonetheless, I'm sure quite a few people were interested in the game. Parker selected a much-changed lineup, bringing back Rodak in goal and playing a 3-4-2-1 with Cavallero and Lookman. Cavallero and Lookman alongside Carvalho leading a front three, with Joe Bryan, Josh Onuma, Andre Frank Zambo-Anguissa, Deco Reed, Tete Adarabioyo, and Ream captaining the side in our farewell to the Premier League. Looking at the game and looking at the goals and looking at the misses, it didn't seem there was much different to normal. Did either of you go? Did either of you watch? Were you surprised by anything in the team selection or the performance? I sort of just open this up for your thoughts. I know we don't want to spend the whole evening here. Scott, what were your thoughts on the match?
No, for a start, I mean, I didn't go. I didn't even bother sort of entering the ballot. And I weren't going to pay 40 quid for the benefit just to see us relegated and a half haphazard sort of kind of walk around the pitch, clapping the team off for really a kind of below performance season, really. So I was a bit like you. I kind of put it on the TV. I had it on the background. I thought I'd give it a watch because obviously, we introduced Rodak, Ream, and a couple of others. And I mean, to me, that kind of just said that we were going to experiment a bit and just see how we got on. I mean, like you say, I don't really want to dwell on the game. I mean, we got beat. I mean, there was no real changes in regards to our attacking kind of performance. I mean, again, we advanced with the ball. We got to the attacking area. We stopped. We come back again. And it was really the same kind of sort of problems that we've had all season, really. There was no Mitro in the side. who I say for whatever reasons has kind of been neglected all season. Whether it really is an injury or it is a kind of a case that we're not playing him because he wants away. It could have been last game that we maybe could have seen of him. I don't know. So, I mean, for me, the game was kind of a bit of mixed emotions. It was good to see the youngsters come through and have some minutes. I'm not going to cover the glaring miss from Cavallero again. It just adds to a tally of that kind of ignorance of constantly playing him up front. I get it's not the lad's fault. He's not a striker. What's he scored? 2 goals all season. But he tries to strike a ball where an inverted winger cuts in and tries to sort of plant one in the top corner, and it just doesn't work, does it? It's all in all, I think, score was pretty fair. Just a closed door really on a really disappointing season, and that's all I'm going to say on the game.
I mean, I think there's a lot of sensible points in there. I think it sort of, we heard it a few times from Parker that if you haven't watched any games of ours all season, you can watch this one and it'll sum it all up. But it sort of felt a bit like that from the review and the highlights. I looked at the 14 shots on none on target, and that's sort of symptomatic of our year. I thought it was a bit of a shame we didn't play Anderson, but by all accounts, he's engaged in talks with potentially a London club for a permanent transfer. So that might explain part of that. And I'm sure some of the fans would have liked to have seen him play, as I thought he was one of our better performers during the year. But in the main, I think Parker's sort of picked the team that he sees that there's the potential he might have some of those pieces at play next year. And although we all agree it's not his fault, if it is true that bridges have been burned with the centre forward who ultimately brought us up last year, Cavallero might be the best we've got up front, and that's quite a frightening proposition.
Just before we move on, though, I just want to jump in there. I mean, the striker thing, and I think I mentioned it after the game as well. I mean, it's been a bit of a bugbear for me all season because I know that we've not kind of had options, and I know that we fall out with players and stuff like that. But it's also been the ignorance of not kind of trying something else in that position. We know that, and I mean, we've broken some kind of candid record here where we've scored 9 goals all season. And we've played what we class as not a very high scoring winger in that position all season. And I mean, if I throw this back at you, I mean, do you think we would have got a better return of playing someone like Bobby Reid there or something like that? I mean, for me, I think that kind of ignorance has kind of crippled us a bit as well. Do you think?
I think it's a good question. I think that ignorance is something that potentially we should sort of talk about. But actually, Gerry, you can think about that first and throw it on to the end of your answer about whether you went to the game and sort of enjoyed it. But you do it, and I'm going to think about that for a few seconds.
I'll start with that one. I think I get the point, and I think Scott was probably overhyped by the Leicester game and the Leicester performance, and felt his tactics were spot on. And of course, Cav played up top that game, and I think that probably solidified his thinking about leaving Mitro out and playing Cav up top probably a lot more than he should have done. But we all know we were left short in that area at the start of the season anyway. But no, I didn't go to the Newcastle game. I had no interest at 40 quid. And not just that, I saw pictures and videos of the people in the ground an hour before the game. And I know people who've missed football and love going to the cottage, but God, that sort of thing's not really for me. If I'd had a season ticket, I'd have gone, obviously, but I wasn't going to pay 40 quid for a one-off. A bit like you guys, I watched it half on, half off. I think when the team selection came out, said it all, we're playing a informed Newcastle side, frankly, so it was always going to be a tough game to stick those players in. And frankly, I think if he'd had the resource, he may well have left every lone player out. Do you know what I'd have done? I know this is going to sound terribly Mickey Mouse. I'd have put Areola on for the last 10 minutes just to allow the fans to give him an ovation, because one loney deserves a good ovation. It's Areola, and I think I'd have done that, and it would have summed us up being quite a testimonial Mickey Mouse side. But there we are. That's what we've been quite a lot of the season. I think it's worth pointing out how astonishing it is that we've ended up 17 points away from Newcastle. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. Everyone was thinking it was going to be the relegation match. I mean, on the old school WhatsApp, I got ridiculed for saying it could well be a dead rubber. I must admit, I thought it'd be closer, but people were arguing. Remember, people were arguing who should get tickets for the Newcastle game. It's going to be the one-off playoff relegation, and they end up 17 points clear. That's quite remarkable. And for me, it does show that those who do all their predictions with 10 games to go, they're gonna win this. It just shows none of that actually works or really comes true, because none of those forecasters would have had them 17 points clear. Mind you, I was chatting to a Newcastle fan at work, and he's a little bit gutted they pulled that much clear, because it gives the club the excuse to keep Steve Bruce there, and they're still not happy with him. But really, yeah, overall, I'm not really going to comment on the game. There's nothing to comment about. It was just, it was pretty rubbish, dead rubber. Pitiful end to a pitiful season.
Indeed, it was a pitiful end to a pitiful season. And actually, yeah, on Newcastle, I think, we all probably sort of underestimated them, but, their highest point return since they actually returned to the Premier League. And, I think at one point, I think the majority of us on this show, including you, Gerry, all thought we had a potential earlier in the season to actually get into the Newcastle game and it not matter for us being ahead of them. So they have actually shown a bit of performance here. That actually, it's always to be careful what you wish for. I think Newcastle fans should be a little careful. I'm never going to lecture the Geordie masses on the ins and outs of their club, like I wouldn't expect us with to anyone else. But you look at Palace letting Hodgson go. I fear for them next year. And love him or hate him, Bruce has done a job at Newcastle, and there's always something to be said for the grass on the green. The grass isn't always greener on the other side.
I will put my hand up to say, yeah, absolutely. After the Liverpool game in particular, I did think we would crawl out of it, and I did think, and I've probably got evidence on the pod somewhere, that we could well be clear of Newcastle. It's just an incredible turnaround both ends. I mean, if you said to me, we wouldn't. I don't think we won a game after Liverpool, did we? If you told me that, I wouldn't have believed you. And equally, I wouldn't have believed Newcastle would have pulled so far clear. So, that's football, isn't it? Yeah,
that's football. That's why we love it. Anyway, we do continue. So let's move on to topic number 2. And topic number 2 is one that sort of actually follows on from the Newcastle game. Really, it's about whether fans make a difference. So this season, as we all know, has been pretty appalling. We've had 19 home games, 2 wins, 4 draws, 13 defeats, and as Scott pointed out, 9 goals scored, which is the lowest number of goals ever scored in a top-flight campaign at home by any team, taking the record from Man City and someone else who held it previously. 19 away games, we actually amassed more points there with 3 wins and 9 draws. It's not just Fulham, though. As looking at some stats this season, with 153 away wins and 143 home wins, the 2021 Premier League season became the first campaign in the history of England's 4 top tiers to see more away wins than home wins. So a peculiar year for sure, and a very long time since the Hodgson era, where Craven Cottage was Fortress Fulham. We picked up the majority of our points at home when we finished 7th, and we did that despite playing terribly away from home. Different times, different eras, sort of different philosophies, and definitely something we can discuss on the next pod. But point remains: did not having fans make more of a difference for Fulham than any other club this season? And do you think anything would have been different for us, even with a socially distanced at Craven Cottage, or would we have still been relegated? It was just something that sort of came to us over the last couple of days. And sort of, Gerry, what are you thinking?
Well, the stats you've said there show fans obviously do make a difference. Home fans with the away records. I mean, in previous years, you'd say a lot of it's to do with intimidating the referee. Home fans have always been able to do that, but with VAR nowadays, that's not necessarily true. Whether it's positive, negative having fans in the ground depends on what club, I guess. I think Newcastle fans with Bruce would have been very toxic, and I think that could have pushed them to the brink. I know that there might be a counter argument that actually they got behind the team and roared them on to victory, but I think they can be really quite evil at home if things aren't going well. And Liverpool, I think that's a classic club where teams go there quite intimidated. Not that they're necessarily noisy during the game, but the whole aura of Anfield and being there. So I'm sure they'd have got a lot more points, and probably we wouldn't have won there. Ditto Everton. And as for us, well, we're always told our atmosphere is crap. And we keep persisting with these cringeworthy clappers. And if things were going wrong, the sort of lesser, shall we say, performing players, like perhaps, or less confident players, like perhaps Cav and RLC and so forth, might have got a lot of stick, which wouldn't potentially have helped. Scott would have got stick if we had that record. But of course, the argument is, would we have had that record? But frankly, our home record couldn't have been much worse. So perhaps we are more influential than we think. But I had to laugh when it was possibly going to be a case of away fans allowed to home fans only for one game, where the Newcastle, I think, CEO was really not happy because it would be an unfair advantage to Fulham. Of course, this when we all thought it might be a playoff. Having got stick that our atmosphere is so crap, and they thought 2,000 fans would make such a difference. So, of course, it makes a difference. But would it have kept us up? No, I don't think so. I think we probably wouldn't have got those results at places we did get results. And I talk about Everton, Liverpool, Spurs, and so forth. I'm not sure we'd have necessarily have done so well there if they'd had their fans behind them personally. So, I think it's definitely made a difference to teams, but depending which club it is, depends on what difference you think it might have made. But I think we can't blame lack of fans for our demise, really.
No, I don't think we can blame lack of fans for our demise. I think the more I think about it, the more it's clear. Fulham are one of those teams. Actually, you mentioned Liverpool and you mentioned Spurs, and I think another one that you can probably mention there, Man United, where you have decent crowds, but they're not hostile crowds in the main, because a lot of fans are either tourists, or you have sort of the grounds can be so cavernous that also it gets to be a nice place to play when you're winning, but it's actually not that toxic when you're losing. And those places like you mentioned, like Newcastle and Leeds, I suspect if you're not having a good run, would be a lot less pleasant to play in. And we've always been terrible away from home, whether it be this season, whether it be our best ever season in the Premier League, where we still only managed to win 3 games away. And so I think, for us, we actually kind of perform better at home than we do away, for whatever reason that will be. And I do think it has affected us. Net, do I think we'd have stayed up with fans this season? Probably not, as I think we have in recent years got a little less patient with playing style and certainly with managers. So I think nothing ultimately would have changed, but whether we'd have been closer to staying above the dotted line, I don't think we'll ever know. But it was just an interesting one to talk about, so I thought I'd bring it up. And Scott, what were you thinking on this one?
No, I don't think we would have stayed up. I mean, from the Liverpool game, it was a complete collapse from us. I think we'd lost something like 10 games on the bounce when you include the Newcastle game. I mean, actually, sort of just going back over this again, I didn't realise this either when Gerry was saying like we were 17 points from Newcastle, and then you add that to the 9 goals that we scored at home, and some of the performances and stuff like that. It really was another disastrous season, wasn't it? I think, if anything, I think the season was masked because we didn't have fans at games. And I think Gerry brought up a good point about, the amount of stick that players would have got if fans were there. Now, I mean, we're known for giving players quite a bit of stick. And then when you look at, like the players like Cavallero, Ruben Loftus-Cheek, even Parker at times, making decisions with subs and stuff like that. I mean, I think personally towards the end that it would have got quite hostile. And I reckon that it may have kind of heaped a little bit more pressure on us, and made it a lot more harder. But I think we was always going to go down. I mean, even I see some stats, I don't know if you guys see it I can't remember if it was on Twitter or I put it on the forum, whatever it was. They rerun the league based on obviously those VAR decisions, didn't they, and where teams would end up, and we still ended up being relegated anyway. So I mean, for me, fans, yes, they do make a difference. Particularly in the seasons, especially when you go away from home and you beat Everton, you beat Liverpool, you beat Leicester. I mean, for us, like you were saying before, is season for us compared with obviously our normal home record. I mean, even under Hodgson, we'd never usually win away. I mean, if we'd won a few more home games and kind of stayed up this season, that would have been a cracking kind of return, for our first attempt back at the Premier League. But it wasn't to be. fans are always going to have a positive. I'm looking forward to hopefully getting back next season so we can all moan and cheer, and sometimes players do play for the fans, and that does show. They've not had that season. It could have made a slight difference, but ultimately, I think we were still going down regardless.
I think that's a fair summary. I was just as you came to your last point, I was just going to sort of say, I wonder, do you think if we'd have had some fans in the stadium more often, Parker and Mitrovic might have been better friends? I think for me, Mitrovic is clearly a player who thrives on sort of confrontation, particularly in sort of hostile stadiums. So I think maybe that would be one I'd like to see a bit more differently. And also, you don't there was a fantastic article from Joe Bryan a couple of weeks ago on sort of mental health, and you imagine as a player you get into sport and everyone's energy comes from different things. So I guess we might have seen some players play differently, but I'm inclined to agree with you both. We probably just weren't good enough.
I mean, I just sort of reiterating the point, and it might sound a bit harsh, but I think our players currently this season were very soft. They weren't Clint Dempsey, for example, he thrived on the fans behind him. Zamora, Zamora exaggerated the stick he got. He could have got a lot more stick, but loved to play to the fact that he thought he got too much stick. I think our players were incredibly soft touch this year, so any criticism, bar a couple like Mitro, they would have gone into their shells and probably been even worse. We might be below Sheffield United, so therefore no crowd might have helped us.
Always want to see optimism in a tough situation. Good job, Gerry. Okay, so let's move on. Topic number 3. So topic number 3, sort of dealing with the departures. I've seen some of the Loney sharing platitudes of sort of encouragement and warming sentiment towards Fulham. I think Anderson, Areola, Lookman, and Lemina all shared some thoughts this week. The head coach has sort of said that we're not going to exercise the options on Madger and Aina's deal. No word yet on a world-class loanee from West London Blue, but I suspect he's looking at other teams to relegate for next season. And so I think it's a nice point, and probably the last point we'll really have to talk about them. Any of the loanees you'll miss? And sort of on this one, Scott, I'll probably throw it to you.
Yeah, I mean, from the loanee front, I think I'm going to miss a goalkeeper, Areola. I thought he was an outstanding player this season, especially in a poor side. Deserved, his player of the season. I thought Anderson come in. He kind of tailed off towards the end, but I mean, a lot of players kind of heads dropped. Those last 5-6 games, you can't really blame him. But I mean, and also Olorena as well. I think he put in a shift. So there's 3 there that I thought were kind of up for the calls. And I mean, even Lemina, you can probably say, even though he was injured, he still come in and showed a bit of heart and whatever. But I mean, I'm like any kind of person, really. I can't get emotionally attached to kind of loan players. They're not ours. And regardless of however good they are or what their mentalities are, I mean, saying goodbye to the fans and, putting things up on social media is all going to be part and parcel of, the club's kind of structure anyway. And, it's kind of, I just think it's part of the process of players leaving, I mean, for me, yes, they've come in, they've done a shift. There's a couple there that I'll probably will miss. But the bottom line is, it wasn't job done. We've still got relegated. They go off to their parent clubs. We seek life in the Championship, unfortunately. And that's kind of where I stand with it. I mean, when you look at some of those players and some of the prices as well, I mean, even if we were still in kind of Premier League and you were going to activate some of them kind of buy clauses, I mean, would you still potentially pay 10 million for Madger? Would you pay 12 million for Olorena? So there's some question marks over them, really, and whether they were going to be good enough to even continue in a Premier League side moving forward. Lemina at 6 million, yes. I think he's a player that can change a game, and if I could convince him to stay down in the Championship, if we can cover his wages, I would probably I would probably make a move for him. But I don't think that's going to be plausible anyway. So, but I want to hold. I mean, for me, it's a clean slate. I mean, from this pod, I was looking forward to it because we can now shut the door and move on, and hopefully, it's an end of a disappointing season.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I mean, we signed a number of players, and there's two ways of looking at it. You signed a load of players on loan who you can't really invest yourself and your energy in, or I suppose the other way you could flip it on its head. So what if we signed all these players permanently? Who would we be happy with? And I mean, the goalkeeper, I was going to actually say any of these loanees in the mix for player of the season, but I think you said it, Scott, deserved winner of player of the season. I thought I voted for Areola on the club's poll. I thought he had an excellent season. I'm sure Gerry can sort of mention whether he went for a permanent player or a loanee next. We'll be talking about the permanent players next week, but I thought that Areola had a great year. Anderson, I thought, showed touches of brilliance, but had the turning circle of the Bismarck at times, and his pace was exposed. Lookman started brilliantly, but for whatever reason, sort of tailed off. As I think one of our regular co-hosts, Mike, said, we managed to coach him down to our level, which was a real shame. I agree with you on Lamina, Scott. I thought he was, I would say, one of the brighter sparks in our squad this year. And if we had signed him permanently, rather than sort of loaning him, I think we'd all be very happy heading into the Championship with him if we were able to keep him there. Madger and Aina, I actually didn't rate Aina, and I'm not going to miss Madger, and we won't talk about our world-class loanee because least said the better there.
Yeah, I forgot to mention Lookman actually. I mean, he was another player that you say started off bright. But I mean, would I spend the money on him? No. I mean, even in the Championship, I wouldn't. Mike said we kind of coached him down to our level, but I just felt with Lookman, he's one dynamic type of player. He spends too much time on the ball and probably contributed to half of our problem of actually not kind of delivering enough quality into the box. So for me, a nice, bright young lad, but again, he's not one that I'm going to miss, unfortunately. I say thanks, but no thanks.
I think with Lookman, he's a phenomenal talent, and I think in the right team, he's going to really set the world alight. I think, is he a player who's going to drive to the byline and cut it back to a striker and tap it in? No. What's his game always going to be? It's always going to be sort of, I'll say, Raheem Sterling light is where you're aiming for with a player like him, and that's not our system, and it's not, I think, where we've ever tried to utilize him. So I think he, in the right system will thrive. But for me, I think two and a half of the players, if you count Anderson, would have been nice if we owned them and had some resale. But I'm really not going to miss any of the others, which probably shows it didn't really work out. But Gerry, how did you see him?
Well, first, let's start with Lookman, as you've just been talking about. I mean, we should give him a bit of credit for being about the only bright spark in the first month or two of the season. I mean, if you'd stopped the season then, he'd probably be player of the year by a distance because he was the only one performing. But for me, he just never really did he? And I think Scott's right, never provided that delivery. Lamine is an interesting one. I was told by an insider at the club when we signed him that he's a bit odd that he only signs for managers who buy him. No, sorry, he only plays for managers who buy him. So if Scott's off, which we imagine he might well be, it's dubious whether Lamina stays. Apparently. I have to say, going back to Scott's point about the goodbyes, it's a little bit bizarre that we're doing all the website doing all this. Oh, bye to everyone. We're in a team that's just gone down. It's like the European squad have just left or something. You know what I mean? Breeder Hangland didn't even get a line, did he, when he left? So I find that all very dull. But then also I find the happy birthday thing a bit bizarre. But anyway, on the loanies, I think Areola is obviously a big miss. But I think we're all Rodak fans, aren't we? And we'll have to be patient with Rodak because he is still young and learning, and he's not going to produce the level of performance Areola did. But as I say, he's universally liked, so we hope that continues. I mean, Anderson, of course, will miss, but I have to say I'm not overly convinced he's going to make it a big club. But I think, as you both say, really, the rest of them in general will be largely forgotten about in these sort of annals of time, really. So yeah, nothing for me. Player of the year, as you know, I voted for Harrison Reed, largely because I run a supporters club, but actually, I do like to see a player actually is a club player winning it. However, of course, I've no issues with Ariona winning it. I mean, it's scary how much we needed him and still ended up being relegated by a country mile. Good luck to him. I used to, when there were crowds in the ground, talk about almost the clapometer when players return. Do they get applause or boos or ripples or what? And I think you can safely say if Ariona and Anderson ever return to the cottage, they'll get huge applause. The rest, maybe a few ripples. So it'll be interesting to see if Scott leaves us, how fans would react if he came out of the tunnel. Would they clap him or boo him? 50-50, I think.
I think that's not a bad barometer. I'm not sure we were allowed to cheer if you were at the game at the weekend, were you? It was quiet clapping in your masks. But yeah, I think that's a fair point, and it's a nice point to draw our season's review of sort of some of those departing a line under it. I think, farewell, sweet princess, you will be missed, but good luck in the future, and thanks for everything you gave us, but wasn't quite enough. So anyway, let's continue. Moving on to topic number 4, and I guess this one could take a couple of minutes, or it could take a bit longer. This is one sort of talking about Scott Parker. We spent a lot of time over this season talking about the organisation of Fulham, and indeed we're going to spend probably a lot more time talking about it in the next topic and certainly next week. But for this topic, I think it's probably worth us talking about our head coach. Scott Parker was appointed in February 2019, but he's been part of the Fulham setup since July 2018, and he's been our manager / head coach for 105 games. He's come in, cleared out a lot of the famous 100 million spend. He's steadied the ship last season in the Championship, and indeed got us up through the playoffs. And whichever way it is, it's either he built or has coached a squad that was probably in with a fighting chance of surviving in the Premier League. Indeed, with 10 games to go, we were level on points with Brighton and 1 behind Newcastle. Roll forward to the end of the season, we took 2 points in just over 3 months, and I think, as we all said earlier, we were sort of relegated with a whimper. Athletic articles suggest Fulham want Parker to stay. So the question here is should he? I guess if we were any other head coach or manager, any other club looking at those results in the cold light of day, would there be a bit more challenge? Or given the sort of yo-yoing of a club, is the stability a welcome relief despite that performance drop-off? And, what are your thoughts about the drop-off, Parker, stability? Gerry, I'll come to you first.
It's no secret on here, and anyone who listens to this, that I am a big Scott fan. I was quite amazed how the sort of dial changed from the majority of fans after a dead rubber against Saints. We were already down, but that game really seemed to spark some sort of bad feelings about Scott, Parker Ball, all this sort of stuff. And I think many fans have turned that much that it'll be difficult to get him back on board. He clearly's got an issue with the director of football, as every manager does. It's almost certain the director of football will stay, even if they pretend it's a different role. And in that respect, I think Scott should probably go, to be honest, and go soon. We can't be hanging around to make this decision. Scott and the club owe it to us, the fans, to make a decision quickly, whichever one it is. I remain convinced, I'm afraid, that given the right tools and support, he'd have done okay. But his falling out with Mitro will always be something we'll all look at, because we just didn't get the goals. But we knew start the season we needed more than Mitro, and we talked about it on this pod, didn't we? And he was never given that. We didn't realise he was going to fall out, but we thought he might be suspended, injured, whatever. And he was never given a defence until about a month in. And again, we talked about this on this pod, and then when he got a defence, he did. He got us right. He got the shape. He got us, he proved himself tactically, and we got defensively sound. And we shouldn't forget after a few decent performances, say, I don't know, Spurs, Liverpool, fans are all over him, But I suppose, good performances, like as I said earlier, Leicester probably paralysed him into not being more flexible. Perhaps sort of estranging him, as I said earlier, from Mitro even more. I mean, I think he'll look back and consider how he and the club hyped the players up after that Liverpool game, and they failed to deliver. And there's no doubt his sort of natural cautiousness has outdone us. Though there are stats out there saying we did have the chances, but we just couldn't finish them, and we all know why. There was no centre forward up top. I think he's going to be a good manager in a good setup, but I suspect his time is up with us, which is a shame in my view. And I know it's not a shame in many people's view, but as you know, and I think as we all accept, Scott's not the real big issue here. Whatever manager comes in has to deal with other issues. And if he does go, I wish him well, certainly. But I think his time's probably come up with us, yeah.
That's really interesting. I didn't think that was the way you'd sort of sway on that one. I think he's shown enough for me in the last year to show that he has something about him as a head coach, and he can certainly get the best out of players. But I think where he's going to have to learn, and whether it's at Fulham, and it sounds like Fulham want him to stay, and whichever we'll talk about his sort of comments in the next topic. But he's got to learn to work with the tools at his disposal. I mean, if you threw him into Barcelona, I think he'd be phenomenal. He can sign the team he wants to that plays the way he envisions it. But that's not sort of how it's ever going to work at Fulham. For me, I think it was a case of you've got tools around you, try and get the best out of those tools. And, just because Mitrovic isn't his vision of a striker, work with him. And I think, we did, I think it might have been you actually, Gerry, on an early pod we did right before we even signed all those defenders. Said, we loaned out our only player with meaningful Premier League defensive experience in Mawson. And, I think if he had his time back, he might try and change that. He's certainly got room for learning, but I fully agree with you. I think he's got the potential to be a phenomenal manager. I hope it is at Fulham. I think, let's say, you don't get Alex Ferguson ringing your praises as one of the best managers in England lightly. So I think that's high praise indeed.
Yeah, and you're right. And firstly, I think it's a bit of a myth Fulham wanted to say. I don't believe they do. But I think Scott and the Khans are playing silly beggars at each other, because the Khans don't want to pay him off and Scott wants to be paid off. That's where I think we are. He's disrespected Tony like every other manager because he's rubbish. Don't get me wrong. My view is I'd like him to stay if there was a fundamental change around the football structure. But if you're still going to have Tony on board, then Scott can't work for him. He's openly said he doesn't want him really. I mean, he doesn't quite put it like that, but you know what I mean. So, yeah, I mean, I think if Tony Khan stays within the football structure, Scott should go. Yeah.
So let's park the structure just now. Even though we had that drop off in form with those last 10 games were shocking, whichever way you look at it. And my enduring memory is going to be Parker talking about his lucky jacket. A media campaign bigging up how brilliant our defense is, and then us basically tanking for 3 months. You keep Parker despite the slump off, structure aside.
No. I mean, I have to mention the structure. If we got a proper head coach, let's say Roy, it won't be Roy, let's say Roy, I'd be very happy to have Scott, because I do think he will become a very good manager. But I don't think he can work in the current way because they don't get on, and it just won't work.
I think that's as clear as it's going to be. So, Scott, you've been very patient, very quiet. And I'm not introducing you, Mr. Parker. I'm introducing Mr. Tanfield. What are your thoughts on Gerry's comments?
Yeah, I mean, it's well known on the pod, isn't it? I mean, Gerry's always been pro Scott. I've kind of been Negative, Scott. And not really. I wouldn't say negative, Scott. I've not really been a fan, and I've not. He's not a kind of a coach that I inspired to at the beginning. I didn't really want him, and it's kind of one where I've always sat on the fence with him. He kind of pisses me off one week, and then the next week I'm kind of going, maybe he could turn into a good coach, and then he pisses me off the next week, and it's kind of been a bit of a season or a couple of seasons like that for me over the Championship and this Premier League. I mean, Gerry is right. I mean, the structure that he's worked under has not been good, whichever way you look at it. And that doesn't matter whether that's Scott Parker as an up-and-coming coach or any other coach that's coming into the game. When you're trying to apply your trade in one of the best leagues in the world, you make sure, as a club owner or a director of football, that you give that manager, that coach, obviously the best undivided support that you can on British soil, day in, day out. I mean, when you look at the kind of structure around Scott Parker, Matt Wells, who come directly from obviously Tottenham's, I think, under 18s, under 17s, or whatever it was. I can't remember his name now, Christ, and I should have, but I'm tired. The guy that was with Slav, the defensive coach,
Stuart Gray.
Stuart Gray, we've had him. And you look around that kind of team and everything else, and that is the kind of only bit of experience, he's had to kind of bolster him throughout that season. I mean, even in regards to people like Brian Talbot and stuff like that, I mean, who we never hear of, we never see of. It seems a very bewildering, cold place for them. And as much as Parker does annoy me, I don't think he's been given the best opportunity to apply his trade this year. Yes, I agree that in some instances he's been very stubborn in the way that he's tried to play football, and the process with Mitrovic and Cavallero. I mean, the Cavallero thing with me, and including right up to the last game of the season, has probably done it for me. And I think that when you're a coach in that position, stubbornness can be your biggest killer within the game, and I think sort of leading up to them last 10 games or whatever. I mean this made me laugh. I mean, I don't know if you follow the tweet of Sneaky Fulham fan or whatever, but I mean, he comes out quite a few decent comments every now and then, and I see one the other day that he put on there, and he put, just thinking about how many times over our manager would have been sacked this season if he was a Spaniard called Scottiago Parker. Now, how true is that? Now, I mean, at the end of the day, we've lost, 10 games on the bounce? We haven't won in the last 10 games. We haven't picked up a single.
We didn't win.
No.
We lost.
And I mean, Jukanovic and other managers have lost their job, way before that time period, is that down again to the fault of the owners and because of their incompetence? If we'd have made a move mid-season, would we have survived? Probably not. The bottom line is Scott Parker's here on a 3-year contract. It's very expensive to sack him after the first year. We know that Parker likes a bit of money. He's not going to be easy, and probably just walk away from the job. So, like Gerry was saying, we're probably now at a standoff between club and coach. Parker's always going to say the right things. End of the season, I'm going to build for next season. As he does, he's a professional outfit, and the noise is coming from the owners, or the silence coming from the owners, is absolutely deafening, isn't it? It's they haven't said anything. Parker's reiterated that him and his players have worked hard all season, and granted they probably haven't. They deserve a break. I'd be having conversations now. Like Gerry says, we can't go into next season, kind of waiting for everyone to have their summer holidays in Dubai, come back and then appoint Eddie Howe 2 days before we kick off. It just doesn't. It's not going to work like that. So, I mean, I look at the situation and I was kind of hoping that we would part company. But and this just isn't because I'm not a fan of Parker. I just don't think it's working. I just don't think his style of football suits Fulham. He may be a great coach in months to come, but I mean, for me, I've not enjoyed his style. I think he's stubborn with his style. I think he was pretty stubborn in regards to the type of players that he played this season when he had different options. And even if we do a rebuild program in the division below, it's unlikely that we're not going to see Mitrovic. And when I look at the two, who's going to get you top six? For me, Mitrovic is, Parker isn't. And there's a lot of plus and negatives there that I look at. And for me, I do think that it's time to spend. But when you look at the odds, it doesn't tell you for the bookies that he's going to be sacked immediately. Some of the things that he said tells me that I think he's going to be here next season, because he's mentioning rebuild, looking at different structures. He seems to think that he has learned a hell of a lot from this season. So he's giving off the type of vibes that he or him personally is still going to be at the club. How the owners move, I don't know. As I said, their silence is deafening, so we don't know. But I think something miraculously, there's going to be a turn of events soon. I think something's going to come out in the next couple of weeks. One or the other isn't going to be happy, and I reckon we're going to see a part in the company, personally.
I think there's a lot in there, Scott. I think the owner thing is interesting. I think if there's a noise vacuum, we as fans have a great opportunity to fill it. It's actually not uncommon. You look at the American owners, whether it be the Kroenkes, the Glazers, or John Henry at Liverpool. The owners don't say much, and maybe it's an American thing that we're just not used to. I think, for me, if you ask me personally, do I think Parker should have the job? No. Based on the way we performed, he probably would have been sacked if he did have a silly name, like you said. And I think that a good head coach or a good manager, title semantics aside, sort of can work within the system in place. And sort of one of the questions I'll sort of ask you both here: do you think if you bought in at the start of the season with the tools in place and put the situation in front of them, and our manager was Roy Hodgson instead of Scott Parker, we'd have stayed up?
Good question. I don't think the squad was that good, so we would have made a better fist of it. I think, but I'm not convinced. No, I don't think the squad's that good at all. I think it's been overrated by a lot of people. I just pick up on the point also that I think once the fans turn against the manager, you very rarely get it back. And I think the fans on social media have probably gone against him. Now, if we get to what I'd like to see, and I will probably talk about this in future episodes, a sort of more getting the youth through, it's going to require patience, right? If Scott starts losing early on, say Scott's here next season, he starts losing a few, the fans won't remember that patience message. They'll just go, Parker again, it's Parkerable, it's rubbish, get him out. So, I think he's on a very slippery slope either way. I just don't think he's going to stay. The worst thing we could have, in truth, is if we have this sort of fake video next week where Scott and Tony are sat there shaking hands, going, "We're all great friends and we're working together," because we know that's a lie. So the club's got to say something, and I don't think we can give the owners an excuse for being American, because if they don't say a lot, the owners, they get someone to say it for them. The silence. Sorry, gambling on a bit. But the other thing is, when you were talking about if the manager was Spanish and had been sacked or whatever, Fulham, the Khans and their sort of minions who write all their program notes and stalk us and see what we're saying and all that sort of stuff, are very conscious of their media and want to be seen as great. And as we all know, like him or not like him, Scott. The media loves Scott. So I suspect that's another reason they held up not getting rid of him when they perhaps might have done otherwise.
Mm-hmm. I mean, do you think, Gerry, just throwing this back at you? I mean, do you think the longer? I mean, if Parker does go, or he does walk, or the club part company, do you feel that the longer this goes on, the more damaging it's going to be for next season?
100%.
When you look at this in two parts, it doesn't matter. I mean, like you say, it doesn't matter who you bring in, because obviously they've got to work under Tony Khan. But when you look at the job ahead of not just coming in to change a system, you've got to complete a massive rebuild as well. So for me,
all right.
Sorry, I know this may be getting on to the next kind of subject. Just this is where it gets interesting, because it's kind of like Anyway, look, sorry, I'll throw it back at you, Owen. I mean, obviously you want to move on to the next one, but it's just something that come up with me that I think is important. So
it is important, and it shows the benefit of reading the agenda. So you can come in first on the next.
Did you say that agenda? I didn't say that. Sorry.
But the I suppose I'd be interested, just lastly on this one. Scott, will we have stayed up this season with this squad and Hodgson as manager?
No, probably not. I think we may have been a little bit closer than we would have been. With an experienced manager, obviously with Belisa at Leeds or whatever it is. But I don't think we and Gerry mentioned this earlier in the show. I think we had a couple of flair players in that side, but we had no hard hitting, gritty leaders on that pitch, did we? And again, I think that was half the problem, really. I think we would have been slightly closer, to sort of staying up, but we would have gone down eventually.
I think that's fair. I actually think, if you look at the squad on paper, you could probably draw a lot of comparables with the initial Hodgson side, and we might have actually made a fist of it. And I think I think it's the more you see a manager get experience, the more they're able to sort of work within the framework that's outlined to them. And I personally think we could have just stayed up with somebody with a little bit more grey hairs and a little bit more experience, but we'll never know. And that's that for us to sort of speculate on until we run out of beer.
Well, of course, just to say, Roy obviously has Ray Lewington. We all love Louis, and he's a very experienced coach. What you've got with Scott is a very inexperienced coach, and that's not having a go at Matt Wells. That's just saying, as Scott said, we had Stuart Gray, but actually, Scott's right-hand man is Matt. And what I would say is, I was told that Stuart Gray actually, having witnessed Scott on the training pitch, thinks he's the brightest young coach he's ever come across in all his years of football. So, but that was at the start of the season. Whether he believes the same now is a different story.
Indeed. No, it's a good thing to talk about. And, I think it's clear that there's a lot of positives that we see in Parker and lots of things he's learned, and we all think he's got a chance of being a great head coach either here or somewhere else in the future. Anyway, let's move on to Scott's pressing topic. So topic number 5 is to sort of actually put in context the job that's ahead. I mean, we've got a number of organizational changes being made, and really there's a lot to be done. We've clearly got an advert out for a director of scouting, somebody who you imagine is going to sit between the director of football and the head coach. They're going to have to get used to our system with all of our boxes, whether that be, head coach, scouting, analytics, finance. And then you've also got that advert still out. And then you've got Scott Parker saying, we all need to take a breath. I think it's probably wise to take a little bit of a breather, clear our minds, and then come back with a plan of what we need to do and how we can be successful next year. I mean, for me, it's a case of saying, surely we've known our fate for a while now. And, one of the things we lamented at the start of this year is how long it takes us to sort of get our plans in action, signing players, sort of getting our pre-season lined up. This DOS advert's still out. Director of scouting, I believe it is. The advert's still out. We've seen loan players like Cabano saying they've had no contact from the club yet. A breather seems to be the last thing we need. What do you guys think, Scott?
Christ, I mean, this is a subject that can go on for ages because, this is something that I've generally thought about, since relegation or the last 10 games has been looming, really. Even though Parker's words are, when we deserve a break and whatever, blah, 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 as a club, you would have thought that knowing, obviously, what our fate was going to be come that Burnley game, that you're kind of planning for next season. Even though Scott and the team deserve a break, maybe, you don't expect Talbot and Son to be having a break as well. You'd expect them to be out in the field looking for, obviously, adequate players to rebuild for the Championship. Unfortunately, we're not going to have the kind of what's the right word for it? We're not going to have the benefits of being Norwich, who nigh and kept all of their players. Financially, they took a risk last season by keeping a lot of their players on, obviously, Premiership wages. And if it hadn't worked out, they would have been in a bit of financial crap, apparently. But obviously, it did work out and they bounced straight back. We don't have the pleasure of doing that. We've got an abundance of loanees that have gone back. When you look at the bare bones of the squad and you look at what's good enough, it's not good enough. And on top of that, if Parker wants to build, or if Parker is still here and he wants to build a side that, is more for him, then you're still looking at those other players that potentially got us up last season that are going to be replaced as well. So I think it's going to be quite a big job. You look at the squad that got you up last season. I'm just hoping that the games that Ream has played in, these last 2 games are his last. I really don't want to be sort of contemplating or seeing the club, even though he's got a year on his extension, sort of leaning on players like him, Madoy, or whatever it is again to kind of assault for promotion, because it's just not going to happen. The rebuild is going to be pretty big. We've already got Premier League Premier League teams sniffing around our players at the moment. I know it's at Norwich, you're looking at tossing today. There may be sort of players like Kenny Tete that's not going to want to stay. Gita, as we know, literally was probably on the phone to his agent straight after the Burnley game. And to be honest with you, I couldn't care less if he went. I don't think we're going to be seeing Mitrovic. Ken is now 30, 31. We've then got to kind of go back and put an arm around Johansson and say, look, we've really pissed you off these last 2 seasons. You're a great championship player, but, do you mind coming back doing it a 3rd time, and then we're going to piss you off again once we get promoted? We've then got to look at the kind of bloating of the squad as well. And you look at players that we've got, sort of Nelly, that wasn't any good at Borough, who's on extortionate wages now due to obviously promotional increases on his salary. Cavano the same. We've still got Kamara out there. We've still got the likes of Knockout to come back, who's been ineffective really since he had that one season, Brighton. On the whole of it, people bolt this team together and they go, yeah, that's a great championship squad, but they're not taking into consideration that Congola, we don't even know if he's going to play again next season because of injuries. There's a falling out with Mawson there, he's injury prone as well. We're in a bit of trouble, really. And for me, this rebuild is going to be, I think, quite big. And for those who expect us to bounce back at the first attempt, is going to take some exceptional summer, some exceptional coach, personally. For me, I think this is pretty big.
I agree. I think it's pretty big. And I think the reason it fits so naturally for the last topic, and, you've articulated what a lot of us are thinking here, and, put it all out there for us to process. There is a lot to do. And I think, part of me is hoping that this position of director of scouting is enough that we are able to sort of give our head coach the assurances that, it's a big job, but, you've got as much tools as we can give you to do it. And, I know we all said, I think Gerry said, would you like Parker to stay? Yes. Do you think he will? No. I think, Scott, you were sort of more nervous with Parker. I personally am coming to the view, as much as I've been struggling to get to grips with Parker Ball, he has been in the family, for want of a better phrase, for 2 or 3 years. He knows how it is, and quite frankly, there's still a lot of cleaning house that needs doing. The job he started in 2019 hasn't been finished. We're still working through that squad. We know, I think we're going to talk about it next week, we've got to start blooding more of the academy in the long run. But I think I'm still hoping that, Parker does stay, but he gets to work really soon, because quite frankly, I don't think we can afford to be dragging this out to the middle of June.
I think the problem, sorry, just before you go to Gerry, I think the problem that you got is that if you change coach in this process, you make the job a hell of a lot bigger. By keeping Parker, I think you probably retain 2 or 3 players that you probably wouldn't. But then obviously you're going to lose Mitrovic or whatever. But bringing a new coach into this mix, as well as changing obviously a whole team, and then obviously changing a style of football, could actually backfire on you a lot more, going back to obviously the Mad German sort of season when we were ripped apart quite excessively. Then I don't think it would go to them realms. But this director of scouting position worries me. We love a position at Fulham, don't we? Director of this or director of that or whatever. And I've noticed that when you look at Fulham as a whole, we've always got too many chiefs within the club. So what's a director of scouting going to do? What's he going to do? He's going to tell and direct Brian Talbot and Son what to do. I mean, if they're not good enough and they're not out there getting the right players or looking in the right places, get rid of them. Get rid of them. Get proper scouts in the club. We said it before. From a director of football point of view, not good enough. I mean, I know it's the owner's son. Get somebody in that can obviously orchestrate properly and put these people in place. Sort of going from one to the other, in the end, and ending up in the position that we all know it will end up in, which is the director of football, just makes the whole process a little bit more confusing. And my biggest fear here, and all this rebuild, is that we're going to do the same old. And I put this on Twitter the other day. We go down the same old roads again. We do the same old processes. We're late. It's a mess. And look, I'm not looking forward to this. I'm hoping that we've learned lessons and we do put it right. But the cynic in me is saying, I really am not looking forward to this.
I think we're all nervous for next year. We're either going to go. There's real danger of a double dip in my mind, and I think we've got to do a lot of work. And I think that's everyone in the organisation pulling their weight. And if they can't pull their weight, and if support needs to be put in place, it's put in place. Gerry, in the context of how big a job it is, can we afford to lose Parker?
It's a really good question, and it's been a good conversation. I think, importantly, let's look at Norwich. Scott's right; they did take a gamble, but they also did ship a few out. But they had a director of football, or perhaps that's not his title, but I think his name's Stuart Webber. But someone is very focused on the football, focused with the manager, very joined up, and have a plan. You can do a rebuild perhaps without a manager. It's difficult if you've got a football man there doing that rebuild for you. Now, whether you like Tony Khan or you don't like Tony Khan, no one can deny that his whole focus is on wrestling. He puts it out there on Twitter. It's no secret. So if you do get rid of Scott, he's not looking for players. Who is looking for players? As Scott mentions, the Talbots. I mean, what are they doing? So I think, let's go back to this sort of whole. Firstly, the director of scouting. Excuse me. You have to remember when Tony Khan first came, he wanted nothing to do with scouts whatsoever. He didn't think they added any value. It's total stats, and he appointed Talbot to almost take the heat off him at the time when everyone was saying, "Oh, you're just going to make yourself a stats. It's going to be a stats experiment." So you're Klein assistant to him and Talbot on the other side. And I think the 4 ticks approach that the club always preach about is very misleading. And I'll tell you why I think that. I think the manager has the smallest tick going. We all know Slav got players he didn't want. But equally, he didn't get the players he did want. And I know Scott's been less vocal about this, although he's made hints. But, I understand he wanted Watkins, for example, and the stats people didn't. I remember you, Owen, at the start of the season saying you'd have gone for Watkins for the money. And I think you're dead right. And I think actually it would have fitted Scott's system. So we might have been in a much better position. And actually Scott would have had less excuses. And I think it's quite important to say this. I am a Scott fan, but I think there's a weakness here where I hear from many sources, if he doesn't like you and he falls out of you, you ain't coming back, and it's going to be incredibly hard for him to welcome back people into the camp like Johansson, like Mawson and so forth, because I think he's just fallen out with them and kicked them out and doesn't speak to them, frankly, which I think if that's true, he needs to learn that that's the way forward. I think Johansson will have no interest in going back to Fulham personally. I think the scouting's a fallacy at best. I think reports that one go Talbot. It might have been Peterborough. It wasn't Tony, but he turned up to Peter about 5 times and told the manager, "Oh, we're not going to make a bid." What's he going there for 5 times for? So I suspect the scouts are basically nodding donkeys at the moment. And the finance, well, the splurge they made, the 100 million, and now they've had to do the whole loan approach, shows what a monumental cock-up we've made here. So I think this whole 4 ticks thing basically is, no. There's a huge tick what the stats people want, and you might get some players that the manager insists on. Mitro being a clear example, where those who sorted the deal out openly told me that they made sure Calms kept well away from it because he would have ruined it. But beyond that, I think the stats minions crunch that computer to failure. And I have to be very clear. I'm not against stats at all, and I know people go out there and say, oh, you're against stats. Of course, I'm not against stats. That's absolutely ludicrous. And I'm not one who says managers should pick all the players. Absolutely not. You don't want a situation when the manager brings a load of sort of his mates along. But I want a joined up approach of stats, the manager, the scouts working together for the good of the club. It's not that difficult. Leeds have it. Most clubs have it really, but they have to be committed football people. All respect disappears, and we get what we saw this season. You've got a director of football there. I'm sorry to bang on about it, but he's not committed. He's watching his wrestling. He's playing with his wrestling. You've got videos of him doing his wrestling. So you can't sit there and say, I'm fully committed to the job. Especially when you've got a rebuild, probably 10 players. What's Tony Khan going to travel over to America and watch a non-league game, against someone to pick up a player? Of course he's not. So really, really big issues going on. So in that respect, that's where I think the argument will be. Scott will be saying, and I think he's in a good position to identify players he thinks can get us back up, or certainly maybe a plan for the long term. But he can't do it all alone. And I do remember the director of scouting was only leaked out when the fans were putting the heat on Tony Khan. That was just a sort of, shall we say we've got a director of scouting? We've been waiting 9 months. I mean, come on. I have a little fear in what happened 2 years ago, whereas I don't know if you guys were at the Watford and Southampton away games. 95% of the away fans singing, "Are you watching Tony Khan?" Everyone knew he was having a disaster. He wasn't the right person. And yet, I see start of this season where I'm criticising the director of football for his lack of commitment, etc. I'm getting told it's boring, shut up, leave him alone, he's great. I know they've all flip-flopped since, but I can see that happening. And I think that's why the Khans are also keeping quiet. They know the fans are turning on Scott, and they'll blame Scott, and he'll get away with it again. So, it's hard enough doing a rebuild, but to do a rebuild with a non-footballing, non-interested director of football, huge job. And perhaps Scott doesn't want that job. And who does? And you might get to a stage, and because we are well known as a bit of a laughingstock now, that not any sort of decent, prospective, good manager we might all look at and think, yeah, we'd love him. We'll think, no thanks. We might have to go down the mercenary route. The guy who wants the money doesn't care who tells him what to do. We'll just do it and take 2 years worth of wages and then fall out and walk away.
I think Gerry, your points are sort of well made, and we'll agree and disagree on sort of personalities. But the sentiment there is overwhelmingly from all three of us. I think we all want to see this club do well, and it doesn't matter. For me, it doesn't matter what your background is. It just matters that you put in place people around you that make sure you can do the best job and do the best in your stewardship and custodianship of a club, which means so much to so many people. And for me, I'm hoping with these changes we're seeing, they sort of enable Fulham to function more as we'd expect a football club to be run. I mean, we don't hear every communication, and as we said at the start, there is a vacuum of silence. We're filling that silence with speculation and sort of what we hear tidbits, but I think it's clear there is clearly some friction and disconnect internally. And we've really got to hope that the organizational change is being made, and I guess to an extent egos and sort of personalities sort of blend, because they will have to in the long run. Because ultimately, if you have a room full of people who are ruffling it doesn't end well, and we all know this through our own work and our own life experiences. And football is people, isn't it?
Yeah, and a lot of people out there who can never ever see anything bad in their football club, and think everyone makes everything up. It's all great behind the scenes. I mean, all of us, I'm sure, would agree. How pathetic is it that after we got relegated to the Burnley game, Scott had no contact from the owners whatsoever? Now, even if you ring up and say commiserations, it's been a tough year, we'll have a chat at the end of the season, or even if you ring up and say we're sacking you, but to say nothing, it's just childish. We pass messages on to the CEO. What do you mean you pass messages on? This is the owner and the director of football passing messages on. Whichever way you look at that, that is bad. So, frankly, they got to grow up as well.
I think we've got a long summer ahead, haven't we? Really, and also we've still got so much more to talk about. I mean, sadly, everyone, we've sort of run out of time for today's episode of FOF'cast, and as I mentioned at the start of this discussion, it's going to continue on our next pod. We've still got to continue getting to grips with life in the Championship, and and take a look at sort of the outlook for next season's squad, and continue to discuss, amongst other things, what success looks like for Fulham, as well as any sort of ongoing news on and off the field. We've got a long journey to go over the next couple of months, but I'm sure it'll be a roller coaster. It always is with Fulham. Anyway, on that note, I've got to thank Gerry and Scott for joining me. I've got to thank everyone who's taken the time to tune in. And as always, sort of FOF'cast is readily available to download from SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. So please make sure to subscribe if you can to catch any future episodes. Until then, everyone, thanks for listening in. Take care.